translates into an example over here. This is a hypothetical example which obviously will require a lot of technological inputs, but consider this whereas there's an actual socio-technical system in action. So you have a patient who's in a hospital, who's got an attender who's probably stepped out, to probably have lunch or something like that, and an unattended patient is at risk because of various reasons. Okay, you could have a fall, could have a heart attack, and probably a lot of things like that. The patient leaves the room, okay, and there are sensors in the door which actually capture that event. Okay, so the first act of defense or the first initiation point is to actually send the caretaker a message. So that's what happens. The sensor actually covers that, sends a message to the caretaker. The caretaker may or may not be able to act onto it, and this hypothetical case is that the caretaker is too far away to really come and take a look at it. So what really happens, the patient continues and has a fall in a place which is luckily covered by cameras. And now the camera technology is smart enough to detect a fall versus a regular movement, right? So it detects the fall and sends out a message. So obviously the attender has been informed, but the act of remedy over here is to inform the closest nursing care of what's really happened. So the closest nursing care is informed, so they send people to the location. Location is identified, so they can quickly act and send the nursing assistants there to help the patient. Simultaneously, the treating doctor gets a message. So depending on complexity, they may or may not be able to act, but the point is that the doctor is also informed. Now comes a critical part. Now, as a kin, as a family member, you would want to know the status of your family member. So the system should also ideally be sending a message to the person themselves. Now, how well this is actually could be covered in terms of ethical situation, say in our country, do you think systems and doctors would be willing to take that risk, or in US for the matter where people can get sued for a lot of reasons, for negligence and stuff like that. Now these are questions that come in, and this is exactly where socio-technical design comes into the picture. Are these aspects thought about? Do we have laws in place which will actually help take care of this? It's easier to build design a system like this, right? But the concerning aspects, the interdependability on all these is the critical factor. So, and the final part, the reporting. Typically what happens in a system, all of this has happened, and in traditional system, the nurse is supposed to go and fill up all this information, make sure that she hasn't missed anything in the report. It could be first logged on paper and then translated into digitized format. But availability of such a system already generates your report for you, and additional information by your nurse or the doctor could be addendums to this information. But if you notice the chain of how it's plugged in, all of this information to give you a summarized report at the end is the amazing part of it. And finally, based on all of this information, the patient goes through additional treatment and care. So look at the systems working, look at the players working, look at the systems working. There is a monitoring system which is got a huge dependency on technology over here. There is the alerting system where people are has progressed in leaps and bounds, and we also saw in the previous session how we were talking about technology being a game changer, an experience changer. So that's not really an issue at all. The difficulty is in other aspects of it. So one of the foremost difficulties is obtaining subject matter experts, because we're looking at a very large system here, a very large system which consists of various subsystems. So how do they all come together? You might find somebody very good in the radiology aspect of it, but not so in probably some other aspect of it. So ensuring that all of these SMEs are available and interacting and talking to each other is the most important part. The other important part is to understand the central role of people themselves. So, when you're talking about people, you're talking about various people. Not only the end users, but also the people who are actually using and interacting with the system. So identifying their real needs, integrating them into the design is the big challenge. And the other important aspect, and we spoke about it earlier, was the participatory design
Guys,
aspect.
done with
This is where
Sona?
it comes into the picture, where you
Need
actually
more time?
need to get users involved. Because sometimes you're looking at, when you're developing software systems for hospitals, you're not looking at it from a patient angle at all. You're not looking at it at all from what is he expecting. When something happens, what needs to be done. All of that is not considered at all. So this is where you actually look at, the user's preferences. And at this point, I'd like to take another example. So, like I told you, we design software solutions for healthcare providers, and we were designing a system which was for a hospital, and they had this requirement where nurses actually at the end of the shift, they have 3 shifts, right? So at the end of the shift, needed to collate all information. And for medical organizational reasons, they didn't want technological intervention there. So they said it is necessary for the nurse in their own handwriting to pen things down and then go at the end of the day, end of the shift, go into a kiosk and enter that information. And these were, like I told you, organizational, hardships or, rules and regulation that limit experiences, right? So they came back and told us that this is a necessity, that they have to do it this way. So we designed a system for them, and we kept, the end user, the nurses in mind, and the kiosk was built. Everything was fine. But typical scenario, which we could not preempt at that point of time because the system wasn't ready, couldn't be tested, was that at the end of the shift across the whole hospital, you would probably have around 30-40 nurses, and at the end of the shift you'd find a big queue with people lining up in front of the kiosk trying to fill that information in. So that posed a big challenge, which caused the hospital to actually go back and rethink how they wanted to do this. And finally they came up with, with our discussion, with our solutions, came up with a system where we gave them an iPad and they started, automatically taking that down rather than going to the kiosk. But the part I'd like to highlight is the fact that we are sometimes bound by our solutions by the organizational needs and restrictions, laws and restrictions. So it's necessary for that iterative approach where we go about, coming up with the optimum solution. So they made some changes, and now we have iPads given to all of the nurses, which are not for them, but will changing based on.
Let's go to the next step now.
Real time. And all of that information is there.
You must have thought about scenario while
so that's
jotting down the list of problem statement or persona.
So the research
so if you have already written that, or if you have in mind
limited.
what the scenario will be.
The traditional research methodologies
just write that down if it is not already written.
It sometimes is not possible to get actual and realistic
if it is
data
needed.
through the various
if you think
other
it is needed
of,
from
surveys, and things like that, because
or we can directly start for sketching.
User's environment, getting information contextually is the need of the hour. So doing contextual observation
for sketching
is when you get the best.
The per person will do the sketching on different paper. That can be the A4 sheets.
But that's
then
also
you discuss internally. So that will be.
It's also not possible.
It is not validating or iterating with the actual users, but you need to validate internally. Show it to your peers, show it to your team members.
Having all
they will work. They will give you the suggestion and then do the final sketching.
Last but not the least, the law and the society. So the compliance to laws, like for example, the healthcare industry has a whole lot of laws that need to be, followed, even in terms of transfer of information. So I'm not sure how closely you've understood the healthcare system, but we are sometimes through our policy, we just reach out to the immediate person who's giving us the policy. But now that system has got all the more complicated. So they reach out to the hospitals, and all of these, the providers that they're there have doctors within their organizations also who are tracking each of these cases. So they track the cases, they interact with the doctors, all of that comes into the picture. And that's where they have compliance in terms of how does the data go and what format it goes to the other person. So there are a lot of design limitations over here. So you cannot go overboard in terms of your, design solutions when this comes into the picture. And that's where the compliance to laws, is important. Last but not the least, the adaptability. So the adaptability to users and the organizational needs is an important aspect. So those are some of the challenges of the socio-technical system. let's look at the considerations that, when you're coming up with the social technical design. So what's needed here is the system, level requirement thinking. So how does the system really evolve over time? And if you look at it, enterprises have a huge problem these days because systems are growing. They're growing incrementally. Companies like Cisco, EMC have data which are millions and millions of terabytes. And how does data visualization happen there? Now that is something that is so difficult to preempt. But having said that, it's so necessary to do that holistic planning in terms of how all of the system comes together, how all of it actually evolves, and how users actually use that information. So understanding people in the context where they live and work, balancing user needs with business goals and social values and technology capabilities, that's an important part. And people should be involved in the designing process, like we spoke about, the whole participatory aspect. Okay. One important aspect, which is also now being used in traditional HCI related aspect of user experience and all of that, is the concept of system thinking. I spoke to you about how a system is made of a lot of subsystems, and you have an example of here how nature is made of a lot of these aspects, right? The air, water, animals, and all of them are either dependent, interdependent on each other, to survive and perish. So the concept of system thinking is something that plays a very critical role in the socio-technical systems process itself. So understanding the system and how it plays out, all the players that are involved in this is something that you typically have to take. So that's what I had today for the whole socio-technical systems design. Any questions? Anything that you'd want me to take up?
Is it only used in the healthcare industry or anything, any similar industries that you use this type of approach?
Yeah, so traditionally also in manufacturing, industries and all of that is where they use this approach. But why it's needed to be understood is people understand HCI and UCD and now user experience and all that, but this is from where it actually originated, and now it's taken a shape, a slightly different shape. Like I told you, probably your emails and all of that are considered as socio-technical systems, but places where there is an organizational hierarchy, there is organizational processes, business processes which actually impact the design is where this comes into the picture. But it's not very, very popular, but industries like the healthcare, manufacturing, all of that, typically use this. Concepts of these are being explored and, used, but the whole systems thinking, like I mentioned, is something that is very, very useful in any field of design that you look at.
In other words, if there are stringent compliance requirements or discipline that is...
Yeah, and which are also related to the structure of the organization, hierarchical, and you'll see that very prevalent in India, for example, right? I mean, a lot of public sector companies and stuff like that. That's where a system like this might work better.
Do you see this being used in the finance domain?
Also, yes, banking and finance also, is something that you typically use this.
Enterprise applications like ELMs, ERPs would fit into this.
Yes, also, and so in the modern context, that's how it is. So, like I told you, once they started bringing in computers, that's when it started growing into a need where they needed to ensure that not only the organization needs, but the computer scenarios also needed to be taken care of, end users interaction and all that. So now what's happened is in an enterprise world, your user experience design is a part of systems thinking design. So enterprises also use this kind of model, because large enterprises, the ERP systems that they have multiple subsystems which again need to talk to each other, right? So that's when this comes into the picture.
But there will be a lot of challenges.
There will be a lot of challenges, yes. So like I told you, some of the challenges that we spoke about, getting a subject matter expert at a higher level to really look at it. So you might have a small a subsystem being built there, which is again like finance related or something like that. But how that speaks to some other system is not something that you'd probably have an SME being able to you might have an SME for the finance domain, SME for probably the vendor management, but someone overlooking all of this is probably very difficult to achieve. And the more important part is people don't have that vision or even the time for that matter to look at it that way. To say that, okay, we're building this, let's step back and see how does it impact the other subsystems. Nobody is ready to do that in this fast-paced world, but the consequences can come back to bite us, but that's the harsh reality at this point of time.
I don't see these ERP tools or quantum tools come up with this socio model. They go traditionally.
Yeah.
The things never change till now.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking
So,
how much, how many applications you build or any practical.
So for us in the healthcare segment, because the societal aspect comes into the picture, we are considering this. But in other like ERP system, there may not be a direct societal impact. It's more an internal organization impact. It could be productivity and stuff like that, but it may not directly be impacting society. But for us in our healthcare industry, it's a little broader. We have, society to answer to. We have, so it becomes more relevant for us in that context. Yeah, but to be, to be frank, a lot of the lean-based methodologies have, probably taken precedence over a lot of these systems. Because people, I told you, you saw in the last presentation where people are talking about 3 seconds where people are on a site or on an application. So considering all of that, people don't seem to have that time and they don't want to spend that energy on using a socio-technical approach to software engineering. But
problems will be solved. But do you think that using such a tool, your user UX problems, what we face in the websites, in the apps, can come down in just immediately? Thing is that these user-centric problems cannot be solved at a go. It is a process and it has to be taken from the start. So does this sounds familiar that I can't find something on the website so many times that people or your clients say that, okay, the clicks are not increasing, my requirements are not understood, or something like that. My apps are not being downloaded, my package design or my packages are not being liked by people. So many times we hear the same story. So the thing is that the visual part of the design, what you see, is only the tip of the iceberg. Whereas the foundation of a successful design is through a user-centered design process. So going with that, let me talk about Ram's 10 principles of good design. He's a very famous person and he speaks about 10 principles. Innovative, useful, aesthetic, understandable, unobtrusive, honest, long-lasting, thorough, environmentally friendly, and as little design as possible. So if you see, in the entire design industry, we are saying that make your design as little as possible. Talk about the user flow. So what is design? Design is the only the aesthetic feeling that you see. But UX will actually tell you from how to go from point A to point B. Even Norman says the same thing. There's a very nice video which I'll show at the last, if time permits. Anyone aware of this picture? Yeah? Okay, I should not talk about this. Okay, this is just a small example of what the customer explains, and then the people who are involved into it. When you start a project, there are a lot of people involved. Your project manager, your analyst, the client, the business consultant, who say that, okay, this is what my project should look like, this is what my work should look like, and everyone puts up their logic. Everyone, when you are actually doing your UX, a lot of people come in and say कि इसमें ऐसा होना चाहिए, उसमें वैसा होना चाहिए, the functionality should be this, but no one actually thinks about who is going to use it, A very nice case study. He mentioned about sites like Amazon, Red Tape. These websites, if you see the design is actually not good of these websites, specifically Amazon, the earlier website. And what happened is Amazon had a yellow patch on their website, on the main structure. And what they did is they thought of doing some design, beautification on their website. So they said that, okay, let's remove this yellow patch. Let's make it white. They made this white, and users started coming to them saying, hey, why did you remove that yellow block? It was so nice. So users actually had gone through the website, had seen the yellow block, and the mental model was that the Amazon website is with that yellow block. So there's something called as mental, which a user sees and understands and experiences and gets used to it. So after that, the Amazon had to switch back, getting that yellow block and then removing it slowly, so that they removed in a period of time, little yellow, small, little. So that is what they did. So this is what we do. When we start with a project, we think about the devices, we think about the functionality, we think about the client, we think about the cost, that what is the project cost of this, we think about all these things. But we do not think about the people who are going to use it. So let's focus on the user. That's the mantra of today, that let's focus on the user. Just an explanation of what user-centered design is. It's a development cycle which takes into consideration what users really need and makes adjustments. Now everyone, like designers, we take care of the first part very nicely, because there's wireframing, prototyping, UX, UI terms have been defined to all of us. We take care of this, what users need, we do all that, we do prototyping, wireframing, but then we do not test that wireframe. Very less it happens that we test those wireframes with the users or with a group of people. And adjustments of that, doing the adjustment, testing and tuning the design will never happen. Specifically, a designer will never change his design. He will say कि यार मेरा design है, मैं बिल्कुल change नहीं करूँगा. So that always happens when a designer is working on it. So as a designer, you have to think both logically as well as on the aesthetic part.